All right, everybody. Welcome into Pump Fake. Jarrett Bailey with you as always. Hoping everybody had an awesome Christmas. I didn't, at least not in the afternoon. We'll talk about the Steelers stuff because that's been kind of a hot talking point over the past few days, especially in the city of Pittsburgh. But before we get into that, if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, do all that fun YouTube stuff. And if you are listening to it as a podcast, leave a review. I read all of them. And it's almost the new year. So, say something nice and ring in the new year with some positivity. The Steelers losing their third consecutive game in 11 days to the Chiefs. And this is like the second year now in a row where we've gone from, all right, the Steelers feel like a lock. They can maybe compete for the division and host a playoff game. They're 10-3 2 weeks ago. And now they're 10-6. They've lost their last three games by a combined score of 90-40. All three losses have been by at least 14 points. And, there's some people that have pointed out to me, all right, well, they're playing, three of the best teams in the league. To which my response has been, well, all right, that's fair. But if you can't even be competitive with three of the best teams in the league, then you yourselves are not one of the best teams in the league. Like, if you can't even put up a fight against Philadelphia, you can't even put up a fight against Kansas City. And by the way, the Chiefs offense, which has looked awful all year, hadn't scored 30 points all year, just put up their season high in points against the Steelers defense. That's the highest paid in football. And this is like a routine thing that keeps happening. This is the fourth time in 6 years that the Steelers have lost three straight in December. It's the fifth time in 7 years that they've lost at least three straight after Thanksgiving. And so, once is a tragedy, twice is a coincidence. 4 times in 6 years, 5 times in 7 years, that's a pattern. And when it happens so often over a long stretch of time, that falls back on the head coach. Yeah, that's right, everybody. This is a Mike Tomlin rant episode. But it's not going to be like a fire Mike Tomlin rant for a couple reasons. One, I don't think he should be fired. Although if you said to me, like, hey, you could have Mike Vrabel or Ben Johnson to replace Mike Tomlin, then yeah, I would take that. And two, like, we all know he's not going to be fired. It's like, I'm not going to scream into a void about something that's not going to happen, even if it's what I wanted to happen. But 4 times in 6 years that you lose 3 consecutive games down the stretch at the most important part of the year. 5 times in 7 years, you've done it after Thanksgiving. That's a problem. And I don't want to hear why they didn't have George Pickens. Well, Joey Porter wasn't playing. Week 15, 16, 17, man. Everybody's beat to hell in some way, shape, or form. Somebody's hurt on every team. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. The Chiefs didn't have Chris Jones, and they held the Steelers to 10 points. Like, this is something that only seems to happen this frequently with the Steelers. And now, again, we've gone from, all right, they're 10-3, they're 2 games ahead in the division, to now, all right, let's hope they get the 5 seed so that they can go to Houston and potentially win that game. And this all comes back to the lack of adaptation, the lack of evolving, the lack of changing when it comes to how Mike Tomlin approaches winning. Now, I'll give him credit, and I'll give Omar Khan in the front office credit, like up front, for, giving them the credit that's due. They realized, all right, Kenny Pickett ain't the answer. We got to completely revamp this quarterback room, and they did. You go out and get Russell Wilson, go out and get Justin Fields. Both of them have played well. And I know that Russell Wilson has had a stretch of games where people have been critical of him, rightfully so. But that's what happens when you've got a middle-of-the-pack quarterback. They're not going to be great. They're going to have these spells where they're not very good. Problem is that the Steelers don't have the roster to lift everyone else around him when he's not playing well. If you don't have a Mahomes, a Josh Allen, a Joe Burrow, you got to have the rest of the pieces in place that can pick up the slack when needed. They did it earlier in the year. I mean, they won a shootout against the Commanders. They put up 44 against the Bengals, and then they won the first game against Baltimore in a rock fight where the defense played great. They've shown the ability to do that. They can win in different ways. And the past few weeks, though, like as bad as the offense has been, like the Baltimore game specifically, like, yeah, Russ had 2 bad turnovers. They're still in that game. Take away those 2 turnovers, the defense didn't play well. They couldn't stop Derrick Henry. And then in this game, so many miscommunications that have continued and been going on for the past 3 weeks in this losing streak. And it always seems like something happens around this time of year where everything just goes to hell. And at some point, you got to look in the mirror. You got to look at the head coach and be like, hey, you got to do something, man. I know all the usual suspects when it comes to like the mainstream people. Like, I love Rich Eisen, but we all know how much he loves Mike Tomlin and will never fault him for much of anything. And we'll keep doing the old, oh, well, if the Steelers fired Mike Tomlin, he would be hired by somebody else in a matter of minutes. And that's great, man. That's great. But frankly, I don't care. And again, I'm not sitting here saying fire Mike Tomlin, but I am saying that his style and approach to winning is outdated and it doesn't work. It's not 2008 where you can have the 22nd ranked offense in football and still win a Super Bowl. It's not the 2000s where you only got like 2 other superstar quarterbacks in the conference to worry about. You got like 8. You got to worry about Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson. All in your own conference. It's not just, all right, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady. Those are the 2 guys we got to worry about. You got other dudes you got to worry about. And if you don't have that dude, then you got to have the roster around the guy that you do have who can uplift everything else. And right now, the highest paid defense in football isn't playing like it. Which brings me to my next point about Mike Tomlin. He can't hire a staff that is good enough in these situations. They completely revamped the offensive staff. And again, I'll give the front office and Tomlin credit for doing that. On top of redoing the quarterback room, they said, all right, this offensive staff stinks. We'll fire Matt Canada midseason. We'll hire Arthur Smith. We'll bring in Tom Arth, quarterback coach. We'll bring in Zach Azzani at receiver coach. We'll completely revamp the offensive staff and bring in a bunch of outside guys. Great. Do it again on the defensive side of the ball this offseason. And, a lot of like the Tomlin haters have gotten a lot of flack because they say that he only hires yes men that give him zero threat of taking his job. It's hard to argue with that right now. They had Brian Flores in the building. You could have promoted him to defensive coordinator and fired Terrell Austin. Instead, you let Brian Flores go to Minnesota. You kept Terrell Austin, who hasn't been successful anywhere else in the NFL ever. And now Brian Flores is one of the best defensive coordinators in football, has the Vikings defense playing great, and Terrell Austin is doing what Terrell Austin does and not doing good. And it's put this team in a real bad situation where now, if you lose to the Bengals and the Chargers and Broncos win out, now you're the 7 seed and you're going to Buffalo for the 2nd straight year. So you made all these changes and it yielded the exact same result. And again, when that happens, that's on coaching. You sign Patrick Queen, you bring in Deshaun Elliott, and the defense is still having all these issues down the stretch. And again, for all the issues that the offense has had, they should be able to at least lean a little bit on this defense, which they haven't been able to do over the past few weeks. And his style and approach to winning, thinking that it's still 2008 where you can just win with defense, you can't. And it's kind of been a catch-22 situation where by doing that, they've kind of wasted TJ Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, and Cam Hayward because they haven't had an offense that's capable of carrying them when they don't play well. And you look at, I don't like to, do the whole comparison thing with Bill Cowher because he was far from a perfect coach too. And it was a different era. but he won a lot of big games with bad quarterbacks. And he was able to build good staffs. He had 9 assistants that he hired that eventually got head coaching jobs. Mike Tomlin has hired 0 assistants that have gone on to be head coaches. You can point out, well, it's not his job to, groom guys to be head coaches. No coach does that. Those things happen naturally when you hire smart people. Think anybody's lining up to hire Terrell Austin? No, they're not. That's why everywhere else that he's worked with has fired him. Like I said, I'll give him credit for completely revamping the offensive side of the ball and bringing in smart people. Like the Arthur Smith hire was like a net positive, as much as people might get on Arthur Smith sometimes, myself included. But it's obviously been a net positive compared to what they had. But even then, like Art's not a threat to take his job. Terrell Austin sure as hell isn't. And so there might be a little bit of credence to the fact that, hey, maybe there's a reason he wasn't so worried about keeping Brian Flores around. And again, Mike Tomlin's a good coach, but his style and approach is putting the Steelers in purgatory. For a team like the 49ers, who moved on from Jim Harbaugh and had a few duds at head coach, but eventually landed on Kyle Shanahan, I would happily take a Kyle Shanahan where the 49ers have been to 2 Super Bowls. They're always in the NFC Championship game. And they're going to have the occasional dud year like this year where it's just been a war of attrition and they're full of injuries. And, eventually things just kind of even themselves out and they have a comeback down to earth year. I would happily be a fan of a team like that than a fan of a team that's only going to win 9-10 games a year, get the 7 or 6 seed, and get their asses kicked by a team that's actually good. And right now, Steelers fans are in football purgatory because of the way that the team is built and because they keep having these late season issues. And it's no longer a coincidence. It's become a pattern. 4 times in 6 years, 5 times in 7 years, that's a pattern. And it starts with the head coach.